Hi, everyone, and welcome to my presentation on an ethical dilemma. This dilemma was presented to me by a colleague in my home department of first-year programs, referencing a situation that arose about a decade ago that involved our Office of First-Year Programs, Housing and Residence Life, and a student who was hired for a specialty first-year program that involved a combined role with responsibility split between first-year programs and housing. To start, we will explore the stakeholders and provide a bit of background information. The situation described involved a complex set of mixed responsibilities and power structures. At the time, there was a program that took a first-year program that was FIG, or which stands for First Year Interest Group, and combined it with a residential living and learning experience. Students enrolled in certain FIGs, about one out of every six FIGs offered, would not only be engaged by taking a set of classes together, but also by living together in the residence halls. ResFigs, as they became known, were a precursor at this university to later versions of a larger residential living and learning experiences. As part of each FIG, there is an embedded peer mentor known as a FIG assistant, or FA. For ResFigs, these FAs were given the additional role of basically being half of an RA, holding most but not all of the traditional duties of being a residential assistant, adding to their base responsibility of an FA with first-year programs. The reason they did not hold all duties of an RA was that there was an agreement with both programs that this level of responsibility would exceed the hour cap in place for all university student employees. So the FA position held the majority of the students' employment responsibilities, with additional responsibilities added for their role as an RA. With this, Res FAs had direct supervisors and commitments both in first-year programs and in housing. On the departmental side, Res FA's housing costs were covered in a split commitment from first-year programs funding and from housing, who traditionally paid the total amount of housing for their other RAs. In the dilemma we will explore, it is key to recognize the shared commitments of the departments, the students' multiple responsibilities, and the multiple roles that hold power as the student supervisors. There is also the university as a whole to consider in regard to its social and academic reputation. It is important to note that at the time of the dilemma, the university was already working to combat a reputation as a party school, and in fact was publicizing itself as a, quote, dry campus, upheld partially by housing. The dilemma at hand began with a Res FA being reported anonymously, though by another student, for attending a party where alcohol was served. This is in direct violation of the contract that RAs sign as part of their responsibility to housing. Housing at the time had a zero tolerance policy of drinking and partying, and any RA, found to have attended a party where alcohol was served would be removed from their roles in RA and would be evicted from housing as well. The report did not contain evidence either that the Res FA had in fact been at a party or that they had been drinking. However, when the Res FA supervisor confronted the Res FA about the report, the Res FA chose to be honest and admitted that they had been at a small off-campus party where some people had been drinking, but that they themselves had not been drinking at all, and to their knowledge, nobody drinking was underage. The Res FA knew attending the party was a violation of their housing contract. However, they didn't personally believe it was a problem, since there had been nothing illegal about the drinking at the party, and they themselves had only attended briefly and had not been drinking. They also felt betrayed and confused, given that they had believed only close friends were there and now didn't know who would have reported them to housing, threatening their job and their own personal basic need of housing. First-year programs was informed by housing of the supposed violation of the RA contract, and the supervisors in first-year programs are asked if they will support housing in removing the Res FA from their role, along with the additional consequences of the student losing their job and their housing. First-year programs did not agree with this choice and would not fire the student from the FA portion of their role, since there is no such zero tolerance policy in their contracts for the FA position. In fact, the first-year program's approach to issues such as this in the past was to take a restorative justice approach and to ask FAs to align their behavior with the law and university policies, and to be honest in their mistakes and commit to continued learning and growth to rectify their behavior. In this situation, first-year programs is balancing their own contract requirements for the students along with their knowledge of the importance of their partnership with housing for the continued existence of their program. They are also more aware of the student's financial and social situation and know that any consequence that threatens the student's income and housing will be a truly significant barrier to academic success for the student. Here we see where the conflicting elements exist. Where housing would like to honor the contract and standards they have set for the RA role, the FA portion of that role is not held to such a rigid standard. Since the position is mutually funded and supported by both programs, there is a need for consensus on how to proceed, and this decision will have real impacts on the students' opportunities and success. Both programs must consider their professional standards, their commitments to student well-being, and the implications of the situation on the university's reputation as a whole. In thinking about the moral themes present in this dilemma, I was really drawn to the ideas of justice versus care. The perspective of housing, where their goal was to have a good example set for students, with any party-related behavior labeled as bad, seemed like a strong tie to the ideas of justice and more abstracted yet finite principles of right versus wrong, with rigid and formulaic consequences. First-year programs, however, focused on the theme of care, weighing the impacts of the student with the importance of the rules and thinking more about the complexity of the impacts the situation will have. Broadly, this dilemma also hits on the values of honesty and accountability. The student was honest in that they had attended the party. If they had lied, they likely would not have been facing any consequences, since the anonymous complaint from a student did not include any evidence. This choice to be honest is one that led to the moral theme of accountability, where all parties were weighing if and how students should be held accountable for their actions, and what does accountability even look like? With these themes in mind, we see some of the foreseeable consequences and principles. There is the immediate impact on the Res FA themselves, including their housing, their income, and their retainment of their role as a leader and part of both communities. There is the impact on both RA and FA staffing, since the Res FA bridges both roles. Will either program be left short-staffed? Will this add extra work for other RAs and housing? And how will the fake students be affected if their Res FA is removed from their community? There is the impact on the reputation of the RA role and the authority of housing supervisors. Housing was concerned that if it got out that they had let this go without consequence, that other and future RAs might disregard their contract, degrading the reputation of the role and the department. Meanwhile, first-year programs had a very tight-knit community of FAs, all of whom would be upset at the harshness of the housing policy, as well as for the impact on the Res FA as a student, especially given that this Res FA had 2 years of work before where they had been exemplary, helped to train other FAs, and had gone above and beyond to support students. To dismiss them for a small mistake without a chance to make amends would contradict the values of the FA community and would undermine the role of first-year program staff in the eyes of the other FAs. In truth, as somebody who has not had a background in housing beyond having many friends who were RAs, I was very surprised at the harshness of this policy and immediately thought that the housing contract might have been reminiscent of the one Ariel signed in The Little Mermaid. The difficulty of zero tolerance policies with minimal room for resolution, little focus on growth and learning, and a harsh punitive feeling all made me feel uncomfortable as a practitioner who often would rather value growth than performance from students. In my personal initial response, I was focused on an approach that believes in fostering growth in students and recognizing and rewarding behavior that aligns with ethical standards, such as the student's choice to be honest when confronted, despite the risk of consequences. I was also immediately thinking of this dilemma through an ethics of care lens, drawing upon the work of Carol Gilligan, where an ethic of care focuses on the small-scale personal relationships. I was immediately more drawn to the perspective of first-year programs, who focused on their commitment to supporting the student in the Res FA role and wanting to avoid damaging their financial and housing situation, and to show respect and appreciation for the student's years of work in the program and its community. However, in considering Nash's questions and the broader nuances of the situation, I can recognize the complexity of what it means to support a student's growth and well-being in this situation. Nash notes that recognizing who else matters in their ethical actions requires that students identify all of the involved stakeholders, consider what rights and interests these stakeholders might have, recall what promises and commitments have been made to them, and appraise the impact that institutional actions and policies may have on them. And with this, it would be key for the Res FA to recognize that although their primary tie was with first-year programs, they did sign a contract with housing and did also make a promise to respect housing as a stakeholder within the residential FIG program. They are also, as an upperclassman of the university, called to recognize the social implications of their actions and how attending a party and breaking the rules can set a bad example for other students and for the reputation of their own future alma mater. Finally, this situation is an opportunity for them to explore the impact of policies from the institution and engage in reflection on their own relationship and respect to those rules and regulations that affect their community. Beyond this, there are also the standards of the student affairs profession to consider, stepping outside of my own personal reactions. In this consideration, I looked to the CAS Statement of Shared Ethical Principles, since it seemed like a solid way to account for the shared ground that first-year programs and housing would hold. I have listed the full set of principles here, but the ones of key importance are autonomy, beneficence, and justice. Autonomy holds that we must respect the autonomy of individuals to make their own choices and to face their own consequences. Where I might want to protect the student from the financial consequences of their actions, I must respect that where we give students the right to succeed, we also give them the right to fail, as difficult as that may be. In beneficence, the principles state that quote, we work toward positive and beneficial outcomes. And in this situation, that would require all parties to consider what benefits them and their partners. I believe the zero tolerance policy of housing may not have been beneficial to them. And this situation is an example where they may be challenged as practitioners to reconsider the policy in light of the nuance of the situation. This is in case there is a better policy or solution that more benefits not only them, but also the student. Finally, in justice, practitioners are called to treat others with respect and fairness, preserving their dignity, honoring their differences, promoting their welfare. In this last area, I see that either solution could align with these principles, where the fairness of the agreed upon contract could take primary focus, or that promoting the welfare of the student could, where less harsh consequences could be considered. However, if I were solving the case, I would still choose to focus on supporting the student as a whole, including providing an opportunity for growth and change rather than leaning into harsh consequences. I believe this best aligns not only with the professional standards above, but also with our commitment as practitioners to support the well-being and success of students. Ultimately, I think the best solution for the situation was found, but not without negative consequences. First-year programs refused to fire the student from the FA portion of their role and did not support evicting the student from housing. Since they paid for half of the student's housing already, they needed to find a way to cover the additional cost if housing followed through on evicting the student, which they almost did. Housing agreed to a compromise where the student was fired from their partial RA role, losing the privileges and pay of the position as well. They were not, however, evicted from housing, as first-year programs decided to cover the additional cost of the other half of the student's room and board from program funds, arguing that removing the FA from the residence hall would undermine their own program outcomes, so the expenditure was justified. The student did, though, have to navigate the social repercussions, including having it publicly known that they were no longer an RA, while still living in that same community. Further, this situation did have a lasting impact on the relationship between programs, where when the decision came up a year or two later, the residential FIGs were discontinued, though there are still positive, lasting partnerships between the two programs, just without the split of the supervisory roles. I agree with the solution for how it balanced the stakeholders and also supported the students' well-being. I wish housing had been more reflective in their considerations, especially since such a harsh rule seems particularly difficult to justify, given that student residents were not held to the same punitive standards. I wish there had been more focus on student growth and learning and on valuing ethical behavior overall, including the student's honesty when confronted. The contract has since been changed, incorporating elements including probation periods and more methods employed by our conduct office, rather than a formulaic and rigid system of absolute consequences. The tone and approach of campus around partying has also shifted, where housing does not feel that they are held up as an enforcer of unrealistic behavioral standards and can better align policies and procedures with their own values as practitioners, focusing on fostering community, growth, and healthy and safe living. Thank you, and here are my references. I truly look forward to discussing this with all of you, since, as I mentioned, I don't have as much of a background in housing, and so I am very curious about your perspective from those of you who do have a background in it, be it as a student or as a professional. Thanks all. Bye.